Good evening, and welcome to the International Poetry Forum. My name is Jake Greffenstedt. I'm the new director of this recently revived nonprofit organization. I'll have many thanks to say before I bring on our introducer here, but first I just want to say one thank you to the one individual who's made all of this possible, the man who founded the International Poetry Forum in 1966, who we have with us here today, Dr. Samuel Heaney. From 1966 until 2009, Dr. Heaney ran what was regarded as one of the most significant poetry programs in the country, here in Pittsburgh. We were just so honored that he was willing to pass the torch and let us revive this organization after 15 years. This was historically such an important thing for Pittsburgh. We're so happy to see that over 1,000 people signed up for a poetry reading of Homer on a Friday night. The late James Earl Jones, who served as an honorary board member of this organization, described one of his first experience at the International Poetry Forum as one of his best experiences with poetry. Former U.S. Poet Laureate Gwendolyn Brooks described the International Poetry Forum as a model that should be emulated across the country. And we're just unbelievably excited to bring one of the great living artists to perform for you today. I was asked why we chose Emily Wilson in our relaunch season, and I guess I have two reasons. One, I honestly think she's someone that I have full confidence will see receive the Nobel Prize in her lifetime. She's an incredible talent. And the second is that she's the only Homer translator that I know of that owns a terrible towel. So we're incredibly excited to have her in Pittsburgh. But thank you all so much for coming. To introduce our speaker will be a dear friend, poet, translator, and executive director of Pittsburgh Arts and Lectures. Please join me in welcoming Soni Tonome.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Jake. What an honor it is to be here in this room with you all to introduce a hero of mine, and I'm sure will be of yours as well, if not already. Emily Wilson. Miss Wilson has revolutionized translation. As a poet and translator, I knew when I first read her work that my writing could never be the same. Through her translations, poetry has taken on new meanings and importance for me. It is no longer simply a matter of beauty or language, but poetry has become a factor of the body, of history, and even of survival. And you will understand what I mean in a moment when she takes on the stage. In an interview with Jeffrey Brown for PBS, while showing tattoos of different symbols of Homer's work on her body, she told Jeffrey that I have an Odyssey side of my body and an Iliad side of my body. She lives the world that she translates, and by reading her, we too come to belong into this world. In her work, Miss Wilson has preserved the language of the past and elevated our understanding of it. She has done the impossible by challenging the norms of translation while staying faithful to the original text and their context. It is not just me saying it. In 2019, when she won the prestigious MacArthur Foundation Fellowship Genius Grant, and the announcement the foundation wrote, and I quote, that she brought classical literature to new audiences and work that convey ancient text relevance to our time and highlight the assumptions about social relations that underlie translation decisions. She is very often recognized as the first woman to translate the Odyssey into English. While this is true, it is better to say she is the person with the best translation of the Odyssey in English. Yeah. I say this because no matter how well you think you know Homer's work, believe me when I tell you, there is a whole more to it that only reading Miss Wilson's work will convey. We are in for a treat tonight. Emily Wilson is department chair and professor of classical studies at the University of Pennsylvania, holding the College for Women class of 1963 term professor in the humanities. In addition to translating the Iliad and Odyssey, she has translated 4 tragedies of Euripides, Seneca, 6 tragedies, Oedipus, Tyrannus by Sophocles. She's the author of The Death of Socrates, Hero, Villain, Chatterbox, Saint, and Mock with Death, Tragic of a Living with Sophocles to Milton. She attended Oxford University, where she studied the classics and Renaissance English literature before attending Yale University for a PhD in classics and comparative literature. She has been named a fellow of the American Academy in Rome, a MacArthur Fellow, and a Guggenheim Fellow. We are so fortunate to have her with us tonight. So join me in giving her the warmest Pittsburgh welcome. Emily Wilson.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction to Sunny. Thank you to Jake, the director of the International Poetry Forum, and to Dr. Samuel Hazo for having me, and to everyone for being here. I can't actually see you because the lights are weird, and I just trust that you're there. I feel kind of overwhelmed to be here because of how many extraordinary people, poets and other kinds of artists, have read at the Forum here in Pittsburgh. It's an amazing feeling. I first want also, I do have the towel. I want to apologize that my partner gave me a Steelers pin to wear in honor of this occasion, which I forgot to bring with me, so I'm only wearing my hippocamp brooch in honor of the goddess Thetis instead. But I'm thinking of the Steelers as well. The ancient Greek word poetry, from which we get poetry, poiesis, literally means making. What's made by poets is a web woven of words and a pattern of winged breath that becomes alive again, flying through each new mouth into each new set of ears and brains and lungs that are then receiving this new breath. I know that the mission of the International Poetry Forum has always centered on poetry and performance as a living oral tradition. It therefore feels particularly special to me to be here, because my work as a translator of ancient poetry, including drama as well as the Homeric poems, which of course were based on a long oral tradition and were almost always experienced in antiquity out loud, has been so much about activating and recreating that element for modern audiences through leaning into the metrical, sonic, oral heritage. I've tried to do something different from the modern norm of translating ancient poetry with modern prose or free verse, instead using the traditions of metrical verse in English, trying to echo other sonic features like alliteration and assonance. I think constantly about how to convey the many different voices and perspectives in these texts. In the case of Homer in particular, I think translators have sometimes flattened out the dramatic qualities of these poems, including the diverse perspectives, the way that the Odyssey isn't just about how does Odysseus feel, it's all the other characters in the poem as well, all these many, many different voices. I try to convey metaphors, even if the metaphors are strange to a modern reader. I want to enable a new set of recognitions about what's strange and what's familiar, and those things might be in different places from what we expect. Above all, I care about emotional impact, which I think happens above all in oral performance when people are embodied in space, listening to the same thing, speaking the same things together. If the original poems make me cry, I want the translations, if possible, to make you cry too. If it's funny, I want to make you laugh, if possible. Speaking of tearjerkers, I was told that the most requested passage for me to read was the one about the dog. So I'm going to have to include that. And because that passage is a recognition scene, I thought I should combine it with some other recognition scenes from my translations of ancient poetry. So I originally thought I could do lots and lots and lots of passages from tragedy, and then I realized I'm going to run out of time and I need to get to Homer. So I'm just going to do one passage from tragedy. Like, FYI, there are lots of other really interesting recognition scenes in ancient tragedy that you should go away and read. So I'm going to read at first a passage from Sophocles' Oedipus, which was Aristotle's favorite play. Of course, it's the tragedy in which Oedipus, king of Thebes, who came to the throne after saving the city by successfully solving the riddle of the Sphinx, insists on an investigation into the killing of their former king, Laius. In the course of this quest, Oedipus discovers that he himself was the killer. And there's worse, more bad news. Laius, whom he killed, was actually his dad. Jocasta, his wife, by whom he has children, is actually his mom. So I'm going to read the moment when Oedipus realizes who his parents are, and hence who he himself is, knowing himself for the first time. We recognize ourselves by recognizing others. The chorus treat Oedipus's obviously quite unusual story as paradigmatic for all the people of Thebes, maybe all mortal humans. I hope you can hear the language is different from Homer, full of dense metaphors and linguistic puzzles, including the insistent imagery of Jocasta's body, not as a living human being, but as a place, a harbor, a furrow, a bedroom, into which both father and son have horribly fallen. I hope you can also hear that there's two different metrical forms in this passage. There's a shift in the choral passage. Iu, iu, tapantanexe koisafer. O vos, telutaion sebrop slimy nun, hostis perfasmai fusa phonu kren, sun hoistu kren homilon, hustamuke dekradnon. Io genai broton, hosuma sisarkai tometen, zosa sen arithmo, tisgar tisana pleon, das iudai minias vere, et osuton hoson tokein, kai doxan tapoklinai, ton son toi paradeik mekon, ton son daimon a ton son, otlamon oitapota, broton uden makaristo. Oh, everything now comes clear. O light, I look on you for the last time. Now I'm revealed as who I am, the child of parents who should not have had a child. I lived with those who should not be together, and I killed those whom it was wrong to kill. Oh, generations of mortals, I count you as equal to nothing, even when you are alive. Who indeed, what man ever wins more good fortune than just enough to give an appearance, a show, then slip down? You, poor Oedipus, you, I hold the god of your story. Yours is an example, and I can't count no mortal happy. You shot your arrow far beyond and mastered good fortune, good blessings in everything. Yes, by Zeus, you destroyed the girl with the twisted talons who sang riddling omens. You stood against our deaths, a tower for my land. From that time onward, you were called my king, and you have received the greatest of honors, ruling in this, the greatest of cities. They think it's Thebes. But now, who now have you heard of, more deeply unhappy, in troubles more savage, who lives with such terrible change in his life? O famous, infamous Oedipus, the same mighty harbor was enough for both you and your father, as slaves of the bedroom, to fall in the same. How could those furrows, your father's, how could they bear you for so long in silence? Time can see everything. Time found you out, though you did not want it. Time brings to justice your long ago parenting, marriage on marriage. Child of Laius, how I wish that I never had seen you. How intensely I mourn you and pour from my mouth a cry of deep grief. To tell truth, from you I took breath, and through you I rocked to sleep my eyes. Okay, so now I'm going to turn to the Iliad, and I'm going to start with the beginning of the poem, which is called the Proem. Mernin aeda thea, pelea do Achilleos, ulomanen, hemuria kaios algetheca, polas diphthemus psukas aidi proiapsin, polas diphthemus psukas aidi proiapsin, heroon, autusta heloria tuca cunesin, oio noisita daita, dios de teleto bule, exudeta prota, diaste tenere santa, atredes ten axandron, cae dios Achilles. Goddess, sing of the cataclysmic wrath of great Achilles, son of Peleus, that caused the Greeks immeasurable pain and sent so many noble souls of heroes to Hades and made men the spoils of dogs, a banquet for the birds. And so the plan of Zeus unfolded, starting with the conflict between great Agamemnon, lord of men, and glorious Achilles. So as you can hear already in the first lines, the Iliad, if you haven't read it or haven't read it recently, is about the quasi-divine wrath of Achilles, his menace. The poem in Greek has, I choose wrath because it's not regular anger or rage. The poem has other words for mortal anger. Menace is a word usually applied to the wrath of gods. Achilles is furious against a fellow Greek commander, Agamemnon, for taking the woman he's been enslaving and thereby humiliating him in front of his peers. In his very short life, he thinks the briefness of his fated life is going to be compensated by an almost infinite amount of honor, and yet that's not true. He too can suffer humiliation. Achilles begs his sea goddess mother, Thetis, to restore his lost honor. She does it with the help of Zeus by paradoxical means. Usually Homeric warriors gain honor by killing people on the other side. Achilles gains honor by enabling the Trojans to triumph while he's sitting on the sidelines. So he gains honor not just by not directly killing anyone, letting people die, not moving his swift feet, but also by the deaths of people on his own side, not by the deaths of the enemy. The Iliad is a weird take on the Trojan War stories, which had already been circulating in the Greek-speaking world for centuries by the time the poem was composed. It doesn't have any of the famous bits of the story, like the Trojan Horse. It doesn't have the beginning or the end of the myth. It focuses not on Trojans versus Greeks, but on Greeks versus Greeks, Trojans versus Trojans, gods versus gods, on conflict and mortality as features of all societies, including the three depicted primarily in the poem, and how in every society of living beings, even the animals and the gods, rage and grief are intertwined. So in Achilles' absence, the brave Trojan prince Hector reaches the Greek ships and is threatening to set fire to them, destroying all hope that the Greeks will ever get back home. Achilles' dearest friend, comrade, quasi-wife, Patroclus, begs him to let him go in his place, wearing his armor, as his second self. So Achilles, in his prayer to let the Greeks be massacred while he's sitting out, he hadn't calculated that there's one Greek that he actually cares about, and that's Patroclus. And Patroclus dies. So I'm going to read the sort of recognition scene in which both Achilles and Thetis realize the horror that the success of their plan has created. So this is when the news of Patroclus' death is brought to Achilles. And I'll read also the sequence in which the sea goddesses rise from the sea to comfort Achilles. The sea goddesses, his mother and his aunts, which has a kind of, it's a long list of names. I think it has a kind of ASMR quality, so you can just sort of lean into the sound of names. They can be fun too. Antilochus, the son of great King Nestor, face hot with tears, arrived, approached Achilles, and shared the bitter news. Achilles, son of skillful Peleus, I need to tell you disastrous news. I wish it had not happened. Dead lies Patroclus, and the armies fight around his corpse, stripped of your arms and weapons, which Hector in his flashing helmet wears. At this, a black cloud of despair engulfed Achilles. With both hands, he scooped up fistfuls of soot and dust and poured it on his head and rubbed the dirt across his handsome face. Black ashes settled on his scented tunic. He stretched his whole long body in the dust and lay there. With both hands, he tore his hair. The women whom Achilles and Patroclus had captured and enslaved were struck by grief. They screamed and wailed and ran outside, surrounding the warrior Achilles. With their fists, they pounded on their breasts, limbs weak with shock. Antilochus was sobbing, shedding tears, and holding tightly to Achilles' hands so that he could not use an iron knife to slit his throat. Achilles groaned, heartbroken. He howled in agony. His goddess mother heard him from where she sat beside her father, down in the hollow depths, and keened for him. All of the goddesses who live within the deep recesses of the salty sea, the Nereids, came gathering around her. Cymodocea, Thaleia, Actia, Melia, Halia with ox eyes, Speo, Dunami, Glauci, Limnoria, Thoe, Simothoe, Nesaia, Yaira, Doris, Amphinomi, Agave, Doto, Proto, Dexanomi, Amphithoe, Verusa, Myra, Yanaira, famous Galatia, Callia Nassa, Nemetes, Absudes, Callianaira, Clymene, Yanassa, Panope, Arathea, well-braided Amathea, and all the other daughters of Nereus within the salty depths. They filled the shining silver cave, and all pounded their chests, and Thetis led the mourning. Listen, my sisters, fellow Nereids, so all of you may understand my grief. How I have suffered, what disastrous luck. Cursed with the best of sons, I bore a child who sprang up like a sapling and became the strongest and the best of warriors. I raised him like a young tree in an orchard, then sent him in the curving ships to Troy to fight the Trojans. But now I will never welcome him home again inside the house of Peleus. And while he sees the sun, while he is still alive, he is in pain. I can do nothing for him, even if I go to him. But I will go to see him, because he is my child, and I love him. With these words, Thetis left the cave. The others went with her, weeping, and around them crashed the waves. They swam to Troy, to solid ground, then each in turn emerged from sea to shore, amid the fleet, moored by the Myrmidons, where swift Achilles lay and groaned in grief. His goddess mother came to him. She wept, cradled her dear son's head, and through her tears her words flew out. My child, why are you crying? What suffering has hurt your heart? Tell me, do not conceal it. Through the will of Zeus, your earlier request has been fulfilled. With arms raised high, you prayed that all the Greeks, confined beside the ship's swift sterns, would endure terrible suffering and mortal danger, and yearn for you. So it has been fulfilled. Swift-footed Lord Achilles, groaning, answered, Yes, mother, Zeus has granted me that prayer. But now, what good to me is any of it? My friend Patroclus, whom I loved, is dead. I loved him more than any other comrade. I loved him like my head, my life, myself. I lost him, killed him. Hector slaughtered him and stripped from him the marvelous magic armor, the lovely gifts the gods gave Peleus the day they led you, an immortal goddess, into a mortal's bed. If only you had stayed among the deathless goddesses under the sea, and Peleus had taken a mortal woman as his wife. Your marriage brought never-ending sorrow to your heart for your dead child, whom you will never welcome home again now, because my heart forbids me to live or be with people anymore, unless my spear can strike down Hector first and take his life away and make him pay, because he killed and looted my Patroclus, son of Menoetius. Thetis answered him with tears still pouring down her cheeks. My child, what have you said? How fast your fate runs out. As soon as you kill Hector, you must die. Swift-footed Lord Achilles in despair told her, I want to die, right here and now, because I could not save my slaughtered friend. He died so very far away from home. He needed me to help him and protect him. And I did not go back to my dear country, nor did I save Patroclus. I provided no light or help to him or anybody. Many were overpowered by glorious Hector, while I sat here beside the ships, so useless, a burden on the earth. Although I am superior to all the bronze-clad Greeks in war, though others may be better speakers. If only conflict were eliminated from gods and human beings, I wish anger did not exist. Even the wisest people are roused to rage, which trickles into you, sweeter than honey, and inside your body it swells like smoke. Just so Lord Agamemnon enraged me. But that happened in the past. I must control the feelings in my chest and go to look for Hector, who destroyed the one I loved the most, my head, my life. Thereafter, I will welcome death, whenever Zeus and the other deathless gods may wish to bring it. If I am doomed to die, so be it. I will lie dead, but let me win great glory. Let me make Trojan women mourn forever, and let Dardanian women, thickly wrapped in folded fabrics, use both hands to wipe a ceaseless flood of tears from their soft faces. Let them know how long I was gone from war. And mother, do not hold me back from battle, despite your love for me. You will not stop me. So Achilles' rage is transformed into rage against Hector and all the Greeks, and all the Trojans, no longer angry with the Greeks, but with the Trojans. And despite what he says in that passage, his anger isn't over once he's killed Hector. He keeps on infinitely wanting to keep on desecrating the dead body of Hector, which the gods magically preserve so that he can keep on abusing it by day. Until finally, in the last two books of the poem, in the funeral and the funeral games for Patroclus, and in the meeting with Hector's father, Priam, Achilles moves into a different mood, transitioning from pure rage to grief. He becomes able to act as the host to his military enemy, Priam, king of Troy, who makes a terrible journey through the enemy camp to beg for his son's dead, defiled body from the man who killed him. So that Hector, great hero of Troy, who keeps leaving home repeatedly in the course of the poem, can have a homecoming journey, even though he has that homecoming journey only once he's dead, back to his family. There's a temporary humanitarian pause in the fighting, a time to mourn and share in grief before the fighting continues. So the meeting of Priam and Achilles, which is the last bit I'll read from the Iliad, is, among other things, a recognition scene in that both characters are recognizing a mirror of their own grief in their enemy. Achilles welcomes the old father in the recognition also that his own father, Peleus, will never see him again because he'll die at Troy. So he's recognized his own mortality in a different way from what he could see earlier in the poem. There's a recognition also that loss is universal, that all we can hope to share in the brief time we have alive is moments like this of human connection through shared grief, shared food, shared stories. So this is Priam creeping into the heart of Achilles. Tu stella theisel thon priamos megas, anki derastas, kersin Achilleos labalgunata, kusa keras, denas, androphonus, hai hoi poleas tanon huias. He had just finished with his food and wine. The table was still at his side. Great Priam came in unnoticed. He stood near Achilles and touched his knees and kissed his hands, the terrible, murderous hands which killed so many sons. As when delusion seizes hold of someone who kills a man in his own fatherland and comes to a community of strangers and goes inside the house of a rich man, and everyone who sees him there is shocked, so was Achilles shocked when he saw Priam appearing like a god. So were the others. Startled, they glanced at one another. Priam spoke to Achilles, and this was his prayer. "Godlike Achilles, think of your own father, who is as old as I am, standing over the final threshold between age and death. The people in the neighboring estates probably threaten him, and there is no one to save him from the danger of destruction. And yet at least he hears you are alive, so his heart is glad, and every day he hopes to see his own beloved son come home from Troy, while I have been the most unlucky man alive. In spacious Troy I had the finest sons, of whom not one is left. I once had 50 in the days before the Greeks came. Most of them were killed by furious Ares who undid their limbs. I had just one who kept our town and people safe. And you killed him a short while ago, while he was fighting for his fatherland. Hector, I came here to your ships for him, to ransom him from you. I brought with me a countless ransom. Please, Achilles, show reverence towards the gods and pity me, remembering your father Peleus. I am more pitiable than him. I have endured what no man yet on earth has done. I pressed my mouth into the hands of him who killed my son." This made Achilles yearn to mourn his father. With his hand, he gently took hold of the old man and pushed him back. Then both remembered those whom they had lost. Curled in a ball beside Achilles' feet, Priam sobbed desperately for murderous Hector. Achilles wept, at times for his own father, and sometimes for Patroclus. So their wailing suffused the house. Okay, I'm going to turn now for the final bit to do some readings from the Odyssey. And I know you've been promised dog, but we're not going to get to the dog right immediately, but there will be dog. Okay, I'm just going to do the beginning of the Odyssey first, so that you can hear the differences between the poems. Andra moienepe musa, polutropon, hos malapolla plankthe, epei troies hieron toliethrone persan. Pollon anthropon iden ad astia, kai non egno, polatoi en ponto pathen algea, hon katathumon, aurnomenos hen depsepsuken, kai noston hetairon. Alutos hetarus erusato, hiemenos per, autaun gas veteres in atastalies in olonto, nepioi, hoi catabus herpeo dionasiae loio, estion, autar hotois in apheloto nostimonema, ton hamothen gestea, thugaterdios, epe, kai hemin. Tell me about a complicated man. Muse, tell me how he wandered and was lost when he had wrecked the holy town of Troy, and where he went and who he met, the pain he suffered on the sea, and how he worked to save his life and bring his men back home. He failed, and for their own mistakes they died. They ate the sun god's cattle, and the god kept them from home. Now, goddess, child of Zeus, tell the old story for our modern times. Find the beginning. As I hope you can hear just from the first few lines, the Odyssey is really different from the Iliad in its themes. I use the word complicated to translate the poem's unusual epithet, polutropos, much twisty, complicated, applied to the protagonist and his journey and the poem itself. The Iliad's proem introduces us to intense emotions, the central theme of death and the threat of desecration of the dead, and numerous important names: Zeus, Agamemnon, son of Atreus, Achilles, son of Peleus, because naming, being named and remembered, is crucial to the theme of the poem. The Odyssey begins with no names. The man of the first line is resonantly unnamed, and we get instead an evocation of multiplicity, of how big the world is and how many different twists and turns there are within it, within both the world and a single person. The straight-ahead quickness of Achilles, who runs on his swift feet to kill and to be dead, contrasts with the wily, circuitous journey of the survivor, Odysseus, who can be anyone or nobody. And yet the Odyssey is also a companion poem to the Iliad. Both epics tell the story of a warrior alienated from his society who manages, thanks to the machinations of a tutelary goddess, Thetis in the Iliad, Athena in the Odyssey, to rejoin his community, in both cases at high cost to his comrades and himself. The Odyssey is focused on the paired themes of nostos, homecoming, and xenia, the relationships of strangers, hosts, and guests. It's a cliche to say that the Iliad is about grief and rage, while the Odyssey is about hospitality and homecoming. But the opposite is true too. The Iliad, as we've just seen, ends with a scene of hospitality and homecoming, while the Odyssey builds towards scenes of battle, violence, grief, and rage. So I'm going to now read a passage which may be surprising that it comes in the Odyssey, not in the Iliad, which is the story of the Trojan Horse, which is sung in the context of Odysseus is visiting the Phaeacians on their magical island. And the Phaeacians have it all. They have food, they have wine, they have sporting competitions, and above all, they have poetry, without which no society is great. So they have this wonderful singer, Demodocus, who sings three poetic songs, performances, in the course of Odyssey Book 8, the last of which is a request put in by Odysseus himself, to which he has an unexpected reaction. The passage speaks to the ways that poetry can have unexpected effects and can land differently for different members of the same audience. And it also speaks to the complexities about whose trauma is felt in a narrative that is both about victory and also all victories are also defeats. Now they were serving out the food and pouring wine, and the steward led out to the center Demodocus, the well-respected poet. He sat him in the middle of the banquet against a pillar. Then Odysseus thought fast and sliced a helping from the pig, all richly laced with fat. The plate of meat had plenty left. He told the boy, "Go take this meat and give it to Demodocus. Despite my grief, I would be glad to meet him. Poets are honored by all those who live on earth. The muse has taught them how to sing. She loves the race of poets." So the boy handed it to Demodocus. He took it gladly, and everybody took their food. When they had had enough to eat and drink, the clever mastermind of many schemes said, "You are wonderful, Demodocus. I praise you more than anyone. Apollo, or else the muse, the child of Zeus, has taught you. You tell so accurately what the Greeks achieved and what they suffered there at Troy, as if you had been there or heard about it from somebody who was. So sing the story about the wooden horse, which Epius built with Athena's help. Odysseus dragged it inside the citadel, filled up with men to sack the town. If you can tell that as it happened, I will say that you are truly blessed with inspiration." A god inspired the bard to sing. He started with how the Greeks set fire to their camp and then embarked and sailed away. Meanwhile, Odysseus brought in a gang of men into the heart of Troy, inside the horse. The Trojans pulled the thing up to the summit and sat around discussing what to do. Some said we ought to strike the wood with swords. Others said drag it higher up and hurl it down from the rocks. But some said they should leave it to pacify the gods. So it would be. The town was doomed to ruin when it took that horse, chock full of fighters bringing death to Trojans. And he sang how the Achaeans poured from the horse in ambush from the hollow and sacked the city, how they scattered out, destroying every neighborhood. Like Ares, Odysseus with Menelaus rushed to find Deiphobus' house, and there he won at last through dreadful violence, thanks to Athena. So the poet sang. Odysseus was melting into tears. His cheeks were wet with weeping, as a woman weeps as she falls to wrap her arms around her husband, fallen, fighting for his home and children. She is watching as he gasps and dies. She shrieks, a clear, high wail, collapsing upon his corpse. The men are right behind. They hit her shoulders with their spears and lead her to slavery, hard labor, and a life of pain. Her face is marked with her despair. In that same desperate way, Odysseus was crying. Okay. So now I am going to read a pair of short recognition scenes, which are sort of climactic ones, in which Telemachus is reunited with his father, which kind of happens twice, because after Telemachus has gone on his journey, sort of paralleling his father's journey, he reunites with his quasi-father, Eumaeus the swineherd, and then reunites with his real, literal father, Odysseus. And so they're paired scenes of father-son reunion, one of which is 100% loving and joyful, and the other is more complicated. So this is the first one, where Eumaeus the swineherd is greeting Telemachus, who's come back from his journey to look for his literal father. Amazed, the swineherd jumped up, letting fall the cups in which he had been mixing wine. It spilled. He ran towards his master, kissed his face and shining eyes in both his hands, and wept, just as a father, when he sees his own dear son, his only son, his dear, most precious boy, return from foreign lands, after 10 years of grieving for his loss, welcomes him. So the swineherd wrapped his arms around godlike Telemachus and kissed him as if he were returning from the dead. With tears still in his eyes, he said, "Sweet light, you have come back, Telemachus. I thought that I would never see you anymore after you sailed to Pylos. My dear child, come in. Let me enjoy the sight of you now you are back." So shortly after that, Telemachus is reunited with his literal father, Odysseus, which is a very different emotional register, far more weighted down by pain, violence, and mistrust. This passage starts with Athena doing one of her numerous wonderful makeovers on Odysseus, undoing the beggar disguise and making him look really hot. And then Athena touched him, using a golden wand, and dressed him up in fine, clean cloak and tunic, and she made him taller and younger looking. He became tanned, his cheeks filled out, and on his chin the beard grew dark. And so her work was done, and off she flew. Odysseus went in. His son was startled and looked down, afraid in case it was a god. His words flew out. "Stranger, you look so different from before. Your clothes, your skin. I think that you must be some god who has descended from the sky. Be kind to us and we will sacrifice and give you golden treasures. Pity us." Long-suffering Odysseus replied, "I am no god. Why would you think such things? I am your father, that same man you mourn. It is because of me these brutal men are hurting you so badly." Then he kissed his son and cried, tears pouring down his cheeks. He had been holding back till then. The boy did not yet trust it really was his father and said, "No, you are not Odysseus, my father. Some god must have cast a spell to cause me further pain. No mortal man could manage such a thing by his own wits, becoming young and old again, unless some god appeared and did it all with ease. You certainly were old just now, and wearing those dirty rags. Now you look like a god." Artful Odysseus said sharply, "No, Telemachus, you should not be surprised to see your father. It is me. No other is on his way. I am Odysseus. I suffered terribly, and I was lost, but after 20 years, I have come home. As for the way I look, Athena did it. The goddess can transform me as she likes. Sometimes a homeless beggar, then she makes me look like a young man wearing princely clothes. For heavenly gods, it is not difficult to make a mortal beautiful or ugly." With that, he sat back down. Telemachus hurled his arms around his father, and he wept. They both felt deep desire for lamentation and wailed with cries as shrill as birds, like eagles or vultures, when the humans have deprived them of fledglings who have not yet learned to fly. That was how bitterly they wept. Okay, now the moment you've been waiting for, the dog. So this is a little bit later in the poem, in book 17, where Odysseus is making his way to the palace that's his once and future home, and he finds his old dog, neglected, lying in the dung heap. And I guess I want to just flag two things about it. One is that, of course, its inclusion in the poem cuts against the central fantasy of the fantasy of Odysseus, that you can just erase 20 years, and it's as if you can change back and look exactly the same as you did 20 years ago. Everything is exactly the same. From the dog's perspective, 20 years is already implausibly long for this dog still to be alive. And then the second thing I want to emphasize is that people sometimes talk about the scene as if it's just about the pain of the dog. Of course, there's also an enslaved character talking about the experiences of loyal or disloyal enslaved humans in the passage. And in a way, there's sort of an implicit contrast between the loyalty of the dog and the quote-unquote disloyalty of the humans to their enslavers, which you might think that the fact that human beings who are enslaved don't have the same level of loyalty to their masters that dogs do to their masters. Is that good or bad? It depends whether you're an enslaver or not. So it's a complicated passage. The swineherd and Odysseus went in and stood, surrounded by the strumming sound of the resounding lyre that Phemius was tuning for his song. Odysseus grabbed at the swineherd's hand and said, "Eumaeus, this is Odysseus' splendid palace. It could be recognized among 1,000. The men are feasting. I smell meat and hear the lyre, which gods have made companions at the feast." Eumaeus answered, "Right, you are perceptive. Now we must plan. Will you go inside first to join the suitors while I stay out here? Or do you want to wait, and I will go? But do not stay too long. If someone sees you, you will be pelted, maybe beaten up." Unflappable Odysseus said, "Yes, I thought of that. You go, I will stay here. I have been hit before. I know hard knocks. I am resilient. I suffered war and being lost at sea. So let this be. There is no way to hide a hungry belly. It is insistent, and the curse of hunger is why we sail across relentless seas and plunder other people." As they spoke, Argos, the dog that lay there, raised his head and ears. Odysseus had trained this dog, but with no benefit. He left too soon to march on holy Troy. The master gone, boys took the puppy out to hunt wild goats and deer and hares. But now he lay neglected, without an owner, in a pile of dung from mules and cows. The slaves stored heaps of it outside the door until they fertilized the large estate. So Argos lay there, dirty, covered with fleas. But when he realized Odysseus was near, he wagged his tail, and both his ears dropped back. He was too weak to move towards his master. At a distance, Odysseus had noticed, and he wiped his tears away and hid them easily and said, "Eumaeus, it is strange this dog is lying in the dung. He looks quite handsome, though it is hard to tell if he can run. Or if he's a pet, a table dog, kept just for looks." Eumaeus, you replied, "This dog belonged to someone who has died in foreign lands. If he were in good health, as when Odysseus abandoned him and went to Troy, you soon would see how quick and brave he used to be. He went to hunt in woodland, and he always caught his prey. His nose was marvelous. But now he is in bad condition with his master gone, long dead. The women fail to care for him. Slaves do not want to do their proper work when masters are not watching them. Zeus halves our value on the day that makes us slaves." With that, the swineherd went inside the palace to join the noble suitors. 20 years had passed since Argos saw Odysseus, and now he saw him for the final time. And then suddenly, Black Death took hold of him. Okay, so my final reading from the Odyssey is the reunion of Odysseus and Penelope in Book 23. It is also a recognition scene. Penelope has been refusing to officially recognize the ragged old beggar as her long-lost husband, even after he's succeeded in the test with the axe heads, shooting the bow through the axe heads, massacring all the jerks who've been harassing Penelope in the house. Even after Athena gives him yet another divine makeover, so he looks great, she still rejects him and tricks him by pretending that the olive tree bed built by Odysseus from a tree growing through the house which is supposed to be an immovable piece of furniture representing an immovable marriage, a marriage that's going to just stay exact same place along with the wife staying exact same place despite the husband going off for 20 years, that she pretends that that bed has been cut and moved. The trick works, Odysseus is terrified and therefore furious. And at his outburst of anger, with its implicit acknowledgement of her value and her power, Penelope relents. I think you will probably hear this, but the poem very carefully and precisely delineates the ways that a shared experience is never fully shared. To Odysseus, who repeatedly uses the first person singular, I built this bed, the bed means one thing, about his own ingenuity and power. It means a different thing to Penelope, who's been crying on that same bed for 20 years. In the final simile, the magic of poetic technique allows the perspectives to flip around or to fuse together. The person who you think is the shipwrecked survivor might be someone else. After his bath, he looked like an immortal. He sat down in the same chair opposite his wife and said, "Extraordinary woman, the gods have given you the hardest heart. No other wife would so reject her husband who has been suffering for 20 years and finally come home. Well, Nanny, make a bed for me so I can rest. This woman must have an iron heart." Penelope said shrewdly, "You extraordinary man, I am not acting proud or underplaying this big event, yet I am not surprised at how you look. You looked like this the day your long oars sailed away from Ithaca. Now, Eurycleia, make the bed for him outside the room he built himself. Pull out the bedstead and spread quilts and blankets on it." She spoke to test him, and Odysseus was furious and told his loyal wife, "Woman, your words have cut my heart. Who moved my bed?" "It would be difficult for even a master craftsman, though a god could do it with ease. No man, however young and strong, could pry it out. There was a trick to how this bed was made. I made it, no one else. Inside the court there grew an olive tree with delicate long leaves, full grown and green, as sturdy as a pillar, and I built the room around it. I packed stones together and fixed a roof and fitted doors. I bored right through it, building the 4 bedsteads." I'm just slightly shortening. "Now I have told the secret trick, the token. But, woman, wife, I do not know if someone, a man, has cut the olive trunk and moved my bed, or if it is still safe." At that, her heart and body suddenly relaxed. She recognized the tokens he had shown her. She burst out crying and ran straight towards him and threw her arms around him, kissed his face and said, "Do not be angry at me now, Odysseus. In every other way, you are a very understanding man. The gods have made us suffer. They refuse to let us stay together and enjoy our youth until we reach the edge of age together. Please, forgive me. Do not keep bearing a grudge, because when I first saw you, I would not welcome you immediately. I felt a constant dread that some bad man would fool me with his lies. There are so many dishonest, clever men. That foreigner would never have got Helen into bed if she had known the Greeks would march to war and bring her home again. It was a goddess who made her do it, putting in her heart the passion that first caused my grief as well. Now you have told the story of our bed, the secret that no other mortal knows. You made my stubborn heart believe in you." This made him want to cry. He held his love, his faithful wife, and wept. As welcome as the land to swimmers, when Poseidon wrecks their ship at sea and breaks it with great waves and driving winds, a few escape the sea and reach the shore, their skin all caked with brine. Grateful to be alive, they crawled to land. So glad she was to see her own dear husband, and her white arms would not let go his neck. Okay, so final 2 minutes. I'm going to end with 2 poems that are not translations, sort of speaking to personal experience. My mother died 2 years ago after a painful struggle with Alzheimer's in a care home. And she was a poetry scholar who loved Shakespeare and Sydney. She edited Shakespeare's sonnets. She wrote biographies of Shakespeare. She would have been thrilled to learn about the Poetry Forum here in Pittsburgh, with its focus on poetry for the people and for performance. Even when she'd mostly lost the ability to speak, she still responded when my sister and I would read Shakespearean sonnets to her. The sound of poetry was still meaningful to her, even when she didn't remember that she had once known these poems by heart. So this is a little sonnet, which is one of my attempts to write about that. My mother's inky heart lay in the sound of sonnets ringing always in her ears, offering rhythms that could quell her fears, stifling terror in the throbbing pound of love and loss, the intricate gold cages designed to trap the fleeting wings of time within the filaments of form and rhyme, a theater for all the 7 ages. Her mind was almost gone, but she could smile at poetry. Her gnarly feet still tapped for words that she once taught. Her frail hands clapped for yellow leaves and ruined choirs of time. Her home was words, and when the words were gone, the music of the words was still her home. And then the last... And then during that same period that my mother was dying, one of my children had a mental health crisis. So this last poem is about that pair of experiences, and it's also about Hades and Persephone and Demeter. It's called Hades. Far from the green, green sward, my mother lies in bed, far from the old white house, asleep and almost dead. Her skin is gray and wrinkled, mouth open, legs askew. Take her with you, Hades. She wants to go with you. But please don't take my daughter. She says she wants to go. She's curious about the dark, the places I don't know. Hades, you're my brother, but I won't give you this. Reject her if she asks for you. She does not need your kiss. Okay, sorry. You are a nice crowd.
Emily, thank you so much. That was incredible.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You're a great audience.
What we'll do now is just a very short, brief Q&A before we proceed outside for a book signing. These questions are mostly from submissions we received from our newsletter and social media. So please do reach out in the future if you have any questions for future authors. But I want to actually begin with family, because there must be a critical mass of young parents in the audience. I had at least 3 people ask about introducing these texts to children. I have a 2-year-old daughter at home, and I was telling her about what you do. She loves story, and kind of explaining, and she goes, "She a princess?" And I go, I think she's something cooler than a princess. And she goes, "She a queen?" So 2 is a bit young, but do you have recommendations of, other than reading your work, the best way to get young people into Homer, and then maybe to hear a little bit about your own experience coming to the poems as a child?
Yes, that's a great question. I mean, I actually have heard of people reading it to their newborn babies, and I think that's actually an easier thing to do than with a 2-year-old, because a newborn baby is going to accept anything, and if it has rhythm, it's going to be all the better. I mean, I think there are so many great, picture book adaptations, and also my own kids love the various graphic novel adaptations. There's a whole series of graphic novels focused on the Olympian deities. And you can also do your own, story time, make up your own versions of these myths. I mean, that's also a fun thing to do, right? I mean, I personally first learned about that there was such a thing as the ancient Greek stories and ancient Greek myths through the wonderfully innovative teachers at my local elementary school who were bored of putting on a nativity play every year, so they did the Odyssey instead, because it required more creativity, and we got to have calypso music for the calypso scene, and it was fun. And we also got to make a sort of huge papier-mâché mask for the headmaster to be Polyphemus and get his eye gouged out. And I got to be Athena, which was wonderful. And I was shy and geeky, and just getting to dress up and be a goddess was so exciting. And I just thought, I want to do that for the rest of my life, you know. But then also just learning the languages and realizing that there's this whole world, both of the stories and the literature and the history, but then also that you can learn ancient Greek. I mean, all of you should go do that, and it's really fun, you know?
That's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, it may not be obvious, but you know, it's not obvious that a great translator will be a great poet, and it's not obvious that a great poet will be a great performer. And with Emily, we're lucky to have the generationally rare thing of all three in one.
I think you're way too kind. Thank you. Yeah.
But just looking to the audience here, you know, most of us encountered this text in a high school classroom, but this is certainly truer to the heart of how the text was performed historically. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about when you were writing these poems, these translations, how you thought about the performative aspects of the texts.
I thought about performativity all the time. I mean, that was one of my big goals, was that, you know, of course I had taught undergraduates with many different American free verse or prose translations of the Homeric poems, and I just always felt there's so much missing in the classroom if whenever I asked students to read a passage out loud, but they're not getting any sense of this is rhythmical, it has particular sonic poetic qualities to it, and it's inviting reading out loud. The original invites reading out loud, and it has that sort of narrative momentum where you never get bored, you're always being carried on from one clause to another, and both by the excitement of the story, but also by the music and the rhythm of the sound of the words. And of course, you know, Aeschylus famously said that all of his tragic plays were slices from the great banquet of Homer. And so the banquet of Homer is what then became the whole history of drama. And it has so much drama in it, which you don't get unless the translator is really leaning into those qualities, both the qualities of metricality, musicality, performability, and also the multi-voicedness, the ways that the characters need to sort of sound distinct. And the translation ideally has to have sort of dramatic possibilities in terms of how do you interpret the role. I mean, I think it's great that I've heard various different readings and performances of bits of my translations, and I love it, sort of hearing a new dramatic interpretation of it. I mean, I love hearing a new Odysseus with a different interpretation from the way that I say it. It's really exciting, yeah.
Yeah, you did a wonderful job speaking about recognition. And by the way, Emily and I were speaking of just the theme of recognition in the text, and today she spent most of the day crafting this whole performance based on that theme. It's just an incredible, she did not have to do that, just an incredible amount of work, which was so generous. But it's appropriate because I received a number of messages from some college students asking about Homeric authorship and the recognition of different voices in the text. You know, it's a very polyphonic text. You do a tremendous job of drawing that out. So are there any particular voices in the text that you feel you recognize, or do you have any favorite voices that emerge in the text?
I mean, I feel like I have boring answers, which is like, Achilles is a pretty interesting character. That's a boring answer, right? Because, I mean, everyone who reads the Iliad recognizes that, of course, Achilles is a fascinating character. I mean, I think I have from having spent the last 12 years doing this, I have a renewed appreciation for sort of minor characters. I mean, the characters I think I hadn't paid as much attention to, like Iris, the rainbow goddess, the messenger between the different gods. She's a really cool character, and I love how we get multiple examples of how Iris is very careful to craft her message so that the receiver of the message won't get annoyed. And of course, that's a sort of inspiration to sort of translation is about making sure that the message can land with a particular audience or readership. I think Idomeneus is a more interesting character than I'd realized for the first many times that I'd read the Iliad. Agamemnon, I can sympathize with Agamemnon much more than I could when I was a college student first reading the Iliad. I sort of thought the poem has a very negative attitude towards Agamemnon, who is the great ruler who's always making every single possible strategic mistake and then refusing to take any possible personal responsibility for any of his mistakes and always blaming it on Zeus. And I think now I'm older, I have more sympathy with how difficult it is to chair a department or herd the cats. Yes.
Yeah, so you just finished up finals, and this is wonderful that you're teaching the text to the students, and it's clearly working, because the question that I received more than any other was what you're working on next. I mean, I can't emphasize how incredible that is, that these students have been brought to the text, but then want more. So yeah, do you have any on the scholarly front, the personal front, the translation front? Do you have any projects that you're working on right now?
So two projects I can talk about. One is I'm doing a translation of Ovid's Heroides, which is a sequence of Latin poems of the mythical ladies writing to their terrible boyfriends and exes and all that. And it's really fun. I mean, it's, of course, in some ways in the same world as the Homeric poems, but rhetorically and in terms of voice, it's very different. And, of course, the poetic form is different. So I'm having fun also sort of playing around with elegiac, with having the alternating line lengths. And I'm also doing a sort of fictionalized retelling of the Trojan War myths as a sort of sequence of short stories. So it's prose rather than poetry, but it's a different kind of writing from what I've published up till now, and I'm having a lot of fun doing that too.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This has just been an incredible evening. But before we offer our final thanks to our speaker, I just want to thank you all for coming and being a part of this relaunch. Thank you again to Sam. Thank you to the LZH Hillman Foundation, the Grable Foundation, and our just an incredible body of supporters. We're really able to exist, especially from small contributions by people like you. So you'll see there's a QR code on the handout that you receive that has some wonderful resources on our website about the history of our organization. If there's any way that you can help out, either through donations or volunteering your time, we're always just looking to get involved, and especially in the schools. The last thing I'll say is if you are a teacher or know of a teacher who would like us to, we do school visits and teach about the history of literature in Pittsburgh, so we would be delighted to come and help. That is all I have to say, so please join me one final time in thanking our incredible speaker, Dr. Wilson.